What does it look like to comfort those who are struggling or suffering in their relationship with one another?
When we're sitting with a couple that is suffering, we want to comfort them. We want to join them in what's happening. And so I think a passage that's helpful to understand what's happening is in James chapter 4. I think it'd be helpful just to kind of walk through the first part of
let's do that
passage. So it says in James chapter 4, verse 1, "From whence come wars and fighting among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members?" Okay, so this gives us direction in understanding why marital conflict is a thing. So I know you're a big fan of Taylor Swift. She's had a lot of hot takes over the years. The most recent, thing that she said in one of her songs, I haven't followed it, but I
don't know a single song.
Well,
I could not name a single Taylor Swift song.
I'm here to
You're gonna help me with this?
Yes.
Okay, drop some Swift truth.
So I don't know much about her, but I do know I think one of her latest singles, she says, "It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me." Okay, so she's becoming increasingly more self-aware that she is the problem. And that's actually the truth in our marriages, right? It's like we have to recognize that there's a warring in our members. It's like, I'm the problem in my marriage. And so we're working to get both individuals to see that they individually are the problem in the relationship. When you meet with a couple for the first time, they're so beat up by one another. And we talked about this a little bit in our last time together when we were talking about marriage, where we were saying it's like, what's the root issue of all marital tension? And we see it in the garden, Genesis 3, Satan comes into the garden, he tempts Eve, she sins, right? She pulls Adam into it. So there's this shame. Satan wants us to hate ourselves. And then to offload the amount of weight that shame is, we move into blame. And we see Adam blaming Eve and God, right? So we see this happening in marriages all the time. We feel this self-loathing, and then we offload it onto our spouse. So we want both of them to see not this accuser of the brethren shame, like living in shame, but being able to see that we are exceedingly sinful, that within us dwelleth no good thing, and being able to hold that. And so we keep reading verse 2, "You lust and you have not, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain, you fight in war, yet ye have not because you ask not." So then we go to war in our own unique ways, and this can be like the outcome of that shame and blame. So it could be overt or covert manipulation, but mostly it's just trying to get that other person to meet our need rather than turning to God and having those needs met the way they intended.
Fix them so that the suffering ends. If this person can fix it. So it's like there's this dynamic where on one hand, the person hasn't recognized that they're actually part of the problem.
Right.
It takes two to tango. But on the other hand, as they offload that shame and frustration on their spouse, their hope is that they have, or that God would fix them, because there's a selfish motivation that things would unfold the way they want them to.
Right. And that's what we often see is that we enter into marriage with a false expectation that it's going to complete us in some way. And it's really actually the next opportunity for sanctification. It's about us surrendering for God's glory, right? So when we get that backwards, we're warring and fighting. We can keep reading. It says in verse 3, "You ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your own lust." So our pleading with the Lord is amiss because our motivations are selfish, right? Yeah. It's not about God's glory, it's about me. So our marital issues are actually rooted in a heart issue, right? There is a heart disease there. And then in verse 4, it says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." So the root issue of all marital conflict is this spiritual adultery, right? We are idealizing our spouse in a way. We're expecting them to be something that only God is supposed to be. And so there's this adulterous heart that's happening on a root level. And so we become essentially false worshipers, So I think it's important to understand, we can even jump down to verse 6. We want to provide a comfort and direct our couples to this. It says, but he gives more grace. Okay, so wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. So our couples must have humble hearts to receive the truth. And in order to get to that place of humility, we have to join them in the pit that they're in.
Yeah.
For them to be able to soften. And so essentially it looks like I would break down comforting into two subsets. Okay, so when I'm meeting with a couple for the first time, the first thing that I'm working to do is to fortify the relationship and in the comforting stage. So fortifying and then fostering. So I'm fortifying, I'm trying to build in some structure, some compassion for the, all the defenses and the strategies that they've built in to self-preserve. We need those walls to come down so they can actually receive the truth. Mm-hmm. And then we're fostering the truth. So I'll walk through that a little bit. But I think of marriage a lot of times, like, we see in the book of Nehemiah, it's like, it's a city without walls, so our marriage can be a fortress. It can be a haven. It can be a place of safety and security. It can be a place of a position of purpose, or it can be this city without walls, right? And so we want to, like Nehemiah, we need to help rebuild the walls for that marriage.
One of the questions that I have, I think it's worth addressing, is a lot of times a biblical counselor, with all the right intentions, will go into a setting like this. They will start the investigation process, and then they'll draw really quick conclusions. They'll make the mistake of maybe subconsciously even taking sides, where one person seems more at fault than the other person, and so you don't set out to do it, but you unintentionally come to the aid of one over the other. Then you become condemning, and that makes this whole comforting process fall apart because you aren't truly empathizing, and you're not trying to meet both people where they're at in their suffering and in their sin. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a dance in it. I mean, we have to first and foremost know that both individuals are sinners and have fallen short of the glory of God. And typically, this is kind of stereotypical, but usually there's an overt offense and a covert offense, right? So in the marriage, there's one individual who tends to be more overtly sinful than the other. Like their sin is easy to point out. Yeah, we could use like the stereotype of a husband who lashes out in anger, and then covertly, so implicitly, the wife may have some form of pharisaical like pride and resentment that grows in her heart. So the husband's anger is like a volcano, where and it's more like wrath, right? And we can be angry and sin not, right? But if we let it, if we go to sleep on it, right? If we don't tend to it, then it can start to corrode from the inside, and it can look like a volcano, or it can look like I think of the picture of like of a hot spring. It's like you can't see the effects of it, but you can feel it. It just kind of oozes and permeates. And so a lot of times, say like a wife, she will have this permeating resentment and bitterness that oozes out of her in passive aggression, or so
that only promotes more explosive behavior from him. And this could work vice versa. You're just using the male and female as an example, but the idea is that the explosiveness in one person establishes a cycle of bitterness in the other. Right. That bitterness and resentment, it manifests itself in subtle ways, perhaps, but nonetheless, it provokes in the other person more explosive behavior. And so they just can't get on the same page. And so for the counselor, they're looking at the situation and they're saying, well, the overt sin seems to be the most damnable, right? And that's the person who is at greater fault. And so then they focus their attention and energy on addressing that person versus holistically addressing the entirety of the problem.
Right.